This episode is brought to you by Cobury Digital. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Entrepreneur Rush. Today we're going to be talking about Apple's major update, iOS 14, which is going to completely change marketing by taking all data tracking from an opt-out to an opt-in.
Yeah, and this is crazy, actually. Emil's been warning about this for a while, that someday something would happen and, we'd need to be ready for things to change, and that day has come.
This is horrible, guys. Horrible for online marketing.
So basically what's happening, right, is that tracking is going to become more difficult, and this will have far-reaching consequences on almost every online advertising platform. What's happening is, before, people were able to opt out on websites, on platforms, from being tracked, right? That they didn't want personalized advertising, they didn't want websites to store information about them. And then sometime last year, Safari introduced ITP, Intelligent Tracking Prevention, which meant that cookies were deleted in ever increasing or ever decreasing time spans. And this made traffic tracking more difficult. However, you were still able to collect data from your website visitors and share that with Facebook. It's just that you were not able to track people for as long, for periods of time that were as long. Now, what this newest update does is people have to opt in order for the pixel to be placed in the first place, which means no cookie will be created unless a person opts in.
Yeah, I mean, long story short, right? You will have no data on people unless they say, yes, please take my data. If people do not say yes, you cannot track anything. You don't know if they purchased, you don't know what actions they took on the website, you don't know what interests they have, you can't follow them beyond their visit. Basically, you cannot do any of the tools that made digital marketing so powerful and that made it so much more than what physical marketing was.
And to clarify, sure, you'll still have this data on the website, you just won't be able to connect it with the people who've clicked your ads. You won't be able to see how are my ads performing and where are these people coming from.
And so that's just one aspect of it, right? Because that's it, right? You can't connect it, but neither can Facebook, neither can Instagram, neither can any of these major algorithms that are working on advertisers' behalf. That means that when you're targeting interests on Facebook and Instagram, you no longer have the same amount of data, nor does Facebook, so you're not really hitting just the right segment. You also can't follow up the same way. You really just lack a lot of the information, and so does the algorithm. And at the end of the day, that means that conversions will go down as your ads become less personalized and your opportunities to follow up are just completely disappearing.
And on top of that, up until now, right, you've been able to optimize your ads, your ad spend, your creative, and so on, because you've been able to look at, okay, this ad I have here, right, whether it's targeting a keyword, whether it's targeting people, it's performing like this, right? It has this many conversions, it has this many people clicking on it, and this is what happens. Now you will no longer be able to see how is my ad performing. You won't be able to see what people do after that ad click. And what that means is you won't be able to change your spend to allocate budget better. And worst of all, the platform won't be able to optimize your targeting either, to be able to optimize what ads they show people, because they don't have the data from you. They don't know how people react to your website, and they don't know how people react in general anymore, because they used to be able to coalesce all this data from every single advertiser on their platform and basically create an algorithm that would use all this data to figure out this person, what are they going to do, what are they going to react best to, who's best to show an ad to them. And that's gone.
That's absolutely gone. And I mean, unless something is going to change completely in the way that Facebook is able to maneuver this, or unless prices are going to drop because, it becomes that much more difficult to advertise, so more people leave the platform, etc., what will happen is that your cost per conversions will be going up, and ultimately the amount of money that you make per sale is going to go down. There's really no solution to this.
Okay, but let's take a step back real quick, because I know some people are going to be asking, right? But this only affects iOS users and eventually also people on Safari on their desktops. But why does it have such far-reaching consequences?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm all for positivity, but this is one of those updates where it's very hard to be positive. I mean, towards the end of the episode, we will talk about some of the steps you can take, right? But it's very difficult to avoid this one. So the reason it's so far reaching is that in Denmark, 66% of all devices are iOS. In the US, 33% of the population alone uses iPhones. This is not counting Safari and other iOS devices. So to dumb this down, right? Say it's just 33% at the end of the day. Maybe some people opt in. Maybe some people actually want to share the data. Let's just say, which I doubt it's significantly more in reality, but 33% of all data is lost. Well, that means that you're going to have 33% less data, 33% worse performing advertising. And unless the platform in itself is going to become 33% cheaper, well, the logic conclusion is you've just lost 33% of all of your income.
And these are incredibly optimistic numbers, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't see it happening. I don't think nearly anyone is going to opt in, because even the people that would want to, they don't even notice it. It's going to be such a quick process. And I mean, a lot of people talk about, you can circumvent it like you could with previous updates. You really can't, because this time Apple took control. They're the ones that handle the aspect. It's not on your website. It's not you saying, you designing it, you adjusting it. No, it's happening through their devices. And they want this to happen. They want data to go away in this regard.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, let's make it a bit more concrete. What exactly is changing? What can you no longer do through Facebook, right? Or through Facebook, Instagram, and all these other platforms. First, you can't retarget. If someone goes to your website, you can no longer show them follow-up ads based on what they did on your website, or just in general, you can't show people ads because they visited your website anymore. That link is gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, bearing in mind, this is, of course, only anyone on the iOS device that does not in, right? But the majority, just to be completely clear. So you can't follow up with people the same way you could before. You can't track what happened, right? If you ran a series of ads to test out which one works best, well, you'll have metrics such as click-through rate, etc., on Facebook, Instagram, and others, but you won't know who converted. You could set up, manual systems in play. You could add UTMs. You could add codes, etc., right? But it becomes a lot more difficult. And once again, the major thing that you cannot do is rely on Facebook in the same way to work on your behalf, because previously, it would use this information, and so would other platforms, to really optimize your advertising, to say, okay, off this group you have. I mean, a good example is we have a client here in Denmark, right? We're targeting all females, which amounts to over 1.5 million in the specific ad set and age group we have. And over the last 6 months, we've reached only 150,000 people on Facebook.
With a massive ad spend.
With a massive ad spend. The reason being is that Facebook understands that of all females in Denmark, this is the minority that's actually interested in our product. It knows this because it's tracking conversions. It knows this because it understands information about these people. It no longer does. So a similar ad today would be reaching upwards of 1.5 million, and that's going to be expensive.
We really cannot stress this enough, right? This is something that happens in behind the scenes. This is something that we don't maybe necessarily want to appreciate because, I'm the one doing the ads. I'm the one improving what's going on here. But the truth is that while you can obviously improve stuff, you can obviously make stuff better. At the end of the day, the person or the entity, the decision maker of who is going to see this ad at this moment for this bid, what price is correct to bid for this, what's going to get the best result, that's the algorithm. And it goes far beyond, the shallowest point, right, is who's the audience we want to hit. But it goes much further than that in at what point in time do you want to hit this person? What ad do you want to show this person, right? You have dynamic ads where you can show different medium, where you show a video, where you show an image, different texts. All of this, Facebook is losing out on.
I mean, in more than 7 years of working with Facebook advertising, this is the single biggest change that's happened to me. This is the most detrimental thing that's happened. From cookies and everything in the past, this is just completely different, because what happened in the past is there were workarounds, right? You could use Facebook, you could use other tools to handle this. This time around, there are no solutions. There's things that will minimize the damage. There are alternatives, but unlike with ITP and the others where, you can only track them for 24 hours, so you have to be quick, you have to store the data differently, you have to share it with Facebook. This time, you do not get the data. And people think that there are workarounds that, you can track it otherwise. Reality is you cannot. It's in the control of Apple. And if you do not opt in, the pixel from Facebook and other platforms is not placed and no data is shared.
So before, basically, you could create the cookie and the cookie would disappear. But right before that cookie disappeared, there were things you could do. but now, there's no cookie to delete. And that's why this situation is so grave, why this is such a serious change. But that doesn't mean the situation is hopeless, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, there are things you can do, right? First of all, as I've been saying for a while, and then I know you're backing me up on, Thomas, is stop relying on one platform. I mean, I do not blame Apple. I think they're wrong in this one, but I don't blame Apple. You're the one that's putting all of your marketing into one platform if you're completely lost here. Facebook isn't the only platform. It is the one that's affected the most because it is so dependent on its algorithm. It's so dependent on interest groups. Whereas something like Google, where you're making a specific search query, you don't have those issues in the same way. You still can't track perfectly, right? You will need to use discount codes or different links, URLs, etc. But there you have solutions. You don't really have any on Facebook, right? So first of all, consider other platforms. But beyond that, of course, there are things you can do to take more advantage of the data you already have and to sort of change the way in which you're targeting people. So perhaps you need less data, or perhaps you don't need them on your website. I know you've been working a lot with this, Thomas. Do you have some input here you want to share?
Yeah, so basically there's two things you can start doing here, right? Either you start, and actually, to be honest, you need to be using both in combination. But basically option A is getting data without having to link it back to Facebook via the pixel. This means collecting emails. This means getting people to sign up and become members, and then sharing that data by uploading special feeds to Facebook and then integrating that. One way of doing this is, for example, with its offline conversions feature. But the opportunities are very large, especially with other platforms as well. And so basically, you will have to become that link between platform and your website.
Absolutely. And to those of you that aren't completely sure what Thomas means here, I mean, an example is that you could have a list of everyone that's purchased on your website. You can go into Facebook and you can upload it. And in this way, it has nothing to do with the pixel. You're providing the data, and Facebook will then be able to link it with people on its platform. Because the thing is, contrary to what a lot of people think, it's not Facebook that's affected by this, right? They have the same access to data in the sense that everything that happens on their platform, you have opted into if you want to use their platform. So they can still tie it together. You just need to provide that data. But even that's not really as great as it was before, right? Because we can target those people. But the great thing about order lists were that you could tell Facebook to find people that were similar. And in doing this, it's using data. It's saying, okay, everyone on your order list has these interests. Well, it doesn't know that much about them anymore. So even when it comes to scaling off of offline events, your opportunities are less, although you absolutely want to use it more so than ever. I totally agree.
Exactly. So basically, you can get the info, you can become the link between your website and Facebook. And as Emil explained, that might not be as good. It's still an option, right? This is what we're basically centering around. There is no perfect solution to this. You are going to be impacted. What we're trying to do here is minimize the damage. And a second way to minimize this is to keep everything on Facebook. Like Emil explained, Facebook still has access to everything it did before vis-a-vis what's happening on Facebook itself. And if you can keep people on the platform and create a customer journey that's seamless and that doesn't require people leaving the platform, that much better. That means that you're not losing any data and that you can continue moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to give some examples here, right? We have Facebook shops. So if people are shopping through Facebook, you can track conversions, you can follow up, you can see what's going on. If you're running lead ads, right? If you get their information through Facebook, well, Facebook understands, okay, these different things led to a lead. So those are the kind of people I want to target. The algorithm is optimizing. You have the data you need, right? So there are options. It's just that for e-commerce and other businesses, this has become a lot more difficult because although you might be ready for Facebook shops, our consumers, right? They're so used to landing pages, so they will in turn likely convert worse for a while. And similarly, like lead ads for an e-commerce business, I mean, we've had success with it, but it requires a lot of creativity and it really changes the game. And even beyond e-commerce, right? It's really just limited what you can do because everything has to take place through these platforms. I mean, I know you like video views a lot, Thomas. I mean, that's one way to keep retargeting because we want so many touch points. Could you perhaps give some insights into how you can take advantage of that?
Yeah, exactly. So what we've already started doing, because a lot of people have cookie blockers, because Safari has been deleting cookies over the past years, what you can do is create at least one part of the customer journey on Facebook. And now we'll have to start putting more of that customer journey on Facebook. But basically, how you would do that, and this obviously has its counterparts on other platforms as well, is you show a video to a certain number of people on that platform. It doesn't necessarily have to be a video. It has to be something that people interact with and that platform can recognize and track. On Facebook, the way this works is if someone watches a certain percentage of that video, you can keep that data, right? You can have a list of everyone who's watched 50% of your video, for example. You won't actually have access to names or anything, right? It's just that Facebook knows these people have viewed 50% of your video, and then you can retarget to these people with further ads. Now, why is this beneficial? You will have a list of people who not only have engaged with your content, have watched 50% of your video, which means they already know a little bit about you, meaning they're a bit warmer, a bit more ready to convert. But also you'll have found people who are interested enough in your product or your service or whatever it is you're offering to have watched 50% of your video. And now this only makes sense if the video, if this 50% is long enough to actually be an investment. If it's a 30-second video, 15 seconds probably won't cut it. But if it's a 2-minute video and someone has invested a whole minute of their time into watching your ad, into engaging with your content, that's when you know this person knows about me, this person is interested in my product. And so basically you're creating your own kind of interest groups.
Yeah, right. So ultimately, while previously you'd have people visit the website and then you'd have a pixel and you can show them another ad the day after, now you could say, okay, you've seen my ad, you didn't visit my website, but you got the information in my ad, which had a video that further informed you, something you would have probably seen on the website. And now because you've seen this video, you get another ad, right? So in ways, it's similar to how it was before, right? This sort of helps prevent the complete damage of losing the ability to follow up with people. It doesn't really help the algorithm or anything like that, but it minimizes the impact of completely cutting out those digital touch points that we need. And another thing you can do on this topic, and it's a bit more complicated, but you can share feeds, right? So you can say everyone that's a part of this order list will get an ad on Facebook, but will also get an ad on YouTube and Google, thereby ensuring that a group of people will see your things on different platforms and see different angles. Again, the issue is while previously you could do this to almost perfection, saying you've seen this, then you've seen that. Now you're saying, okay, the whole audience is going to be presented with different angles, but you don't really know if you're doing this cross-platform now, whether people engage specifically with your content, whether that one person in your group that's now seeing a Google ad had already seen your Facebook ad, or if perhaps he will see it later. So it's really nowhere near as perfect as before, but it does help minimize the damage.
Exactly. And the underlying red thread here is that marketing will matter more. Before you were able to get off easy, right, with cheaper conversions via Facebook because everything was easier. You were able to get away with cheap technical solutions, whereas now you need to really be smart. You need to be creative. You need to figure out, how do I get people interested in my product enough to where they opt in, they watch my content on different platforms to really become fans and promote your brand themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about thinking differently, providing more value. And I think one thing we haven't talked about here in the line of this is permissions, right? If you have permission, you can still do everything. I mean, it's going to be difficult to convince people to opt in, but you are allowed to try to convince them to. You are to a certain extent to provide some sort of an incentive to, right? You can tell them that we take your data very serious. You can show them how you treat it and thereby minimize the amount of people you opt out. But more importantly, you can work with permissions beyond that. I mean, your newsletter is more important than ever. SMS marketing is going to be more important than ever. And something really creative that I'm seeing a lot now is getting people to sign up to your website is probably the most important thing you can do, because in the process of doing this, you can have them opt into a series of things. I mean, this in turn this in reality is really what Facebook is doing, right? That's why they can do everything, because you've said yes to it. And unless something changes, you will have to actively say, I've changed my mind. And so for as long as that is here, if you can get people to sign up with an account when they purchase, you can do a lot of the same things you can before. The only thing you cannot fix is really Facebook's algorithm optimizing itself, right? But that is the least of your problems right now. And so I think let's look a little bit more at these positives though, right? These are some mitigation, some things you can do to make it better, but are there any complete upsides to this, Thomas?
Well, let me just interrupt you real quick, Emil. Before we move on to the upsides and what the future holds and what direction everyone needs to be going in, I want to just address one thing that I've been hearing a lot of, namely API conversion tracking, and that this is the solution to the current problem. That's not the case at all. Conversion API tracking, all that does is increases the data that you can collect from your website, increases the odds that you won't lose the cookie you've created. But because the pixel isn't being created at all at the moment, because the tracking is, the cookie isn't even placed in the first place, the conversion API tracking won't solve this issue. It's still a good idea to use because it'll increase the amount of data you get from the people you're getting data from, which is incredibly important now because you're losing data. The more you can get, the better. However, is not a fix for the current situation.
Not at all. I mean, it was a fix to ITP, right? It was a fix to these previous things that happened. And this is really why Apple went the step further to say, okay, look, you're finding creative solutions on Facebook and other places, right, to how to handle the difficulties we're placing on the cookie, or you're getting people to opt in without really knowing what they're doing. Well, now we're taking all control. It's our system that handles this, and now it's become absolutely impossible, with conversion API and everything else. I'm not saying they're not going to find a solution. I'm not saying that not every single Apple engineer is currently working on this. I'm just saying it's going to be very difficult because without the permission of Apple, right, without beating them through the long game, without the permission of doing something, everything is in their system and you'll have to navigate that.
Exactly. But now, let's move on to the upsides, to what the future holds. And while it is true that it's a bit too early to really tell what will happen, I mean, we don't have just one actor here, Apple, in creating this block. We also have Facebook, who will obviously try to develop some kind of solution to this issue that will adapt and potentially overcome this barrier. That said, we do have some thoughts about, what's going to happen, what's this going to look like, and, is there an upside in the first place?
Right. So let's look at some of it. I mean, one upside could be that, people leave Facebook. So less and less people will advertise on Facebook since it's a marketplace. Prices will go down. And, in turn, this could mean that you're more profitable than before. Assuming that, 30, 40, 50% of all data is lost, the question is it going to be enough to make up for that? But that doesn't mean that it's not an upside, right? It doesn't mean that it's not going to mitigate the damage. And maybe in a perfect world, for those great advertisers that will crack the code, that will take advantage of some of the tools we've mentioned today, maybe they're going to see better results, but it's going to be a challenge and it's really going to rely on other advertisers messing up.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen this trend progressing over the last decade, right? Where people, or where Facebook in its golden age, right? Anyone could go on there, do anything they wanted, and see crazy returns. And then as time progresses, more competition came up as prices started going up. And now with more data being lost and it becoming generally more difficult, those people who just go in, try something, don't really know what they're doing, they're going to start seeing lower returns and they're going to start leaving this platform.
Right. And on the topic of people messing up, so one upside is maybe the cost per impression will go down. Another upside is, so say that your largest competitor is affected 40% by this, and if you're affected 20%, right? If you manage to mitigate it to a certain extent, well, then you have a competitive advantage, and this can be an upside, right? So the competition might lower, the market share might increase for you. So there's definitely an opportunity there, and I think that's perhaps the biggest potential upside, right? To those few companies that really manage to minimize the damage here, to really manage to find different ways of handling it, you're going to get ahead of the competition. It's going to have to be a lot to really make up for what we're losing here.
Exactly. And while we did see, this whole development, iOS 14 in general, will affect smaller companies more than it might very big companies, because very big companies already have this data, whereas smaller companies do not. And we're relying on interest-based targeting on lookalike audiences, which makes, starting up especially difficult now. However, on the flip side, right, if you're too static, if you're not going to adapt to this, if you're not able to provide your customers with value, and we're relying on flooding Facebook with advertising budget, that's going to see you're going to see lower returns, and those companies that are innovating, that are providing value, that are getting referrals naturally, organically, those are going to start seeing better returns.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking about it as we're talking here, right? Like, how can you be positive? How can you turn this into something good? From a
Because,
marketing
you have to,
perspective,
right?
But you have to, right? And I know beyond marketing, there's upsides, and it's a whole political debate, and we're not gonna get into that, But it's really, really hard to see something absolutely positive from it if you're currently relying on Facebook and Instagram. What I do think, though, and what I think is the beauty of any crisis, because this is really what it is for marketers, right? It's similar to crises we see in other things. Usually what happens on the other side of a crisis is that innovation, will really pull forward, and we usually see crazy developments that create new opportunities we hadn't seen previously. So I guess that's one of the things we're looking towards, right? Will we be able to crack the code, and will this lead to something new and even better? Will the consumer appreciate? Maybe they don't get the same personalized ad experience. I think they're going to disagree with it, but right? Will it perhaps mean that they have more faith in companies? Will this in turn change something? Will we perhaps see less legislation from the EU and other companies or institutions because, people are starting to self-regulate and it's starting to have the impact that they were seeking? I don't know, but I think that's really what we're looking toward. Like, we need innovation to open new opportunities here. And I think most importantly, as we've talked about a lot, you need to consider more platforms, because this really is primarily going to hurt Facebook, Instagram, and these larger customer journeys that you take online, right? It's not going to affect these companies that provide a lot of value, that are revolving around, retention rates that are high, that have newsletters, SMS marketing, and all of these other platforms going for them.
If people love your brand, nothing's going to prevent them from buying.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not the consumer that's doing anything, right? It's not like the consumer is saying, we want to have less of a relationship with you. They're saying that we want to have more access to our data. And I think this is really tailored towards not the companies that they love, right? But the companies that are, taking advantage or mistreating, right? Exactly. So to these companies that had a great relationship with your consumer, you're still going to have it. You just need to find new ways to continuously keep this relationship alive. And, some of the things we've shared today is really one of the best ways currently to go through it, as we're further, delving into it and seeing the larger impact it will have and which solutions different marketers and different platforms will come up with.
Yeah, we'll keep you guys posted as time goes on and as, new developments come in and we figure out new solutions. Until then, the main takeaway here today, right, was this change is going to seriously affect your online advertising.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no way around it, right? Like, we have an update that's going to remove tracking unless they say yes for all iOS devices. I don't want to hear any more people coming up with, excuses or saying it. It's just the truth, right? It's gone. It's gone for that percentage of the population. So that's one thing, right? So further, there are different things you can do. So you want to consider different ways of handling data. So different platforms. You want to consider maybe keeping people on Facebook and Instagram. You want to dive into other platforms. You want to also consider platforms that don't rely as much around data and algorithms to optimize, but more around perhaps storytelling is something that you can take control of, right? So you want to balance these sort of things so the power is in your hands.
And on top of that, you want to start getting permission from customers, right? Getting their data organically, getting them to sign up, become a member, and then using that data in connection with other platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, just to really dumb it down, the best things you can do here and now before we innovate, before we see what really happens, before we find new solutions, is to work with Facebook offline events, right? So get customer data from your own website. You already have a lot of it. You've been able to run ads for a long time. Take this data, store it, use it, create order lists, etc. Turn to lead ads, turn to video views to create retargeting. Do all of those things that you still can and remain positive, because although I might not sound very positive in this episode, there's always opportunity, and this is going to mean that those of us that know how to run ads, those of us that know how to work with consumers and provide value, we're going to find workarounds, and we're going to become a lot stronger than that large part of the competition that's going to give up or perhaps just not, able to find a solution.
The scissor between average marketing and great marketing is going to open up, and the difference is going to get bigger.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, and this also counts for products that are great and products that are good, right? Because if your product is great, it's never been an issue. They're going to find your product. It's more so for those new and rising brands that are trying to tell people their product are great, that are trying to get it into the hands of people so they can judge it. They're going to have a hard time, you know? They're going to have to rethink the way they work with online advertising.
So don't be disheartened. With the right strategy, with the right product, you can still do it.
All right, everyone. That's it for today's episode. And we hope that despite some of my negativity, despite some of my irritation with the changes that are going through, that you know that you're prepared, that you feel like you better understand what's happening with iOS 14, how you can minimize the damage that's inevitably going to be there. And we hope that you will continue to innovate, find new solutions, work with providing values, work with your consumers, because at the end of the day, right, in that regard, nothing's changed. The better product, the better company, the better marketing, it wins out as it always has. And now's the time to share and subscribe.